I still remember the exact moment I found them. Divorce papers. It was a Saturday morning, June 12, 2021. I woke up to the faint sound of birds outside and the distant hum of cars rolling down the street. I was still half asleep, the smell of last night's rain lingering in the air. I thought it was going to be just another weekend, a lazy one, with coffee, pancakes and maybe binge-watching something on Netflix with my wife, Emily. But life has this cruel way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. I walked into the kitchen barefoot, rubbing my eyes, and saw a thin stack of papers on the counter next to Emily's laptop. At first I thought it was something boring, bills, work documents, maybe one of those HOA notices she always forgot to read. I grabbed them casually, sipping the lukewarm coffee she'd left in the pot. The first thing I saw was my full name, Michael Harris, printed neatly at the top. Below it, in bold, were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My heart started pounding, this heavy, painful thud that felt like it was trying to escape my chest. I read the title 3, 4, maybe 5 times, hoping I was hallucinating. But the more I stared, the more real it became. Emily had already signed her part. The lawyer's signature was there too. All that was missing was mine. And yet, she hadn't said a word to me. That was the part that stung the most. Not the divorce itself, but the fact that she was already halfway out the door without giving me the decency of a conversation. I dropped the papers back on the counter and just stood there, frozen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The world outside kept going. Kids were laughing somewhere down the street. A lawnmower buzzed faintly in the distance. But inside, my entire life had just stopped. Emily and I had been married for 8 years. We met back in 2013 at a friend's barbecue in Austin, Texas. I was 28, working as a software engineer, and she was 25, a marketing coordinator with this contagious laugh that turned heads whenever she let it out. I swear the first time I heard her laugh, I knew I was in trouble. We were inseparable after that. Late-night drives, road trips to San Antonio, camping near Lake Travis, binging Game of Thrones before the ending ruined everything. She was my person. Or at least, I thought she. Our wedding was small, intimate, under a big oak tree at Zilker Park. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And at the time that felt like enough. We bought our first house together in 2016, a modest 2-story on a quiet cul-de-sac. I can still picture the way Emily's face lit up the day we moved in. She kept talking about painting the walls this soft shade of sage green, because she'd read somewhere that green made you calmer. We argued about curtains, laughed about who got more closet space, and spent entire weekends building IKEA furniture while cursing the missing screws. Back then life felt solid, predictable in the best way, but somewhere along the way we started drifting. I wish I could pinpoint the exact moment it began, but it wasn't one big fight or one single decision. It was 1,000 little moments stacking on top of each other. I started working longer hours. The tech industry had exploded, and with remote work during the pandemic, it felt like I never logged off. Emily, meanwhile, started climbing the ladder at her firm. She was talented, ambitious, and relentless, and I was proud of her. But her success also came with late nights, constant networking events, and a new circle of friends I didn't really know. We'd sit across from each other at the dinner table, scrolling on our phones instead of talking. Weekends that used to be filled with hiking trails and movie marathons turned into separate plans. She'd have a work brunch, and I'd stay home telling myself I didn't mind. And then there were the small changes. Emily started dressing different. She swapped her jeans and messy buns for tailored blazers and heels. She started wearing perfume I didn't recognize. She started locking her phone more often too, tilting the screen away from me when she texted. I noticed, of course I noticed, but every time I asked, she brushed it off with this half smile and a casual, "Don't be paranoid, Mike." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. I needed to believe her. Finding those divorce papers shattered something inside me, but looking back, maybe the cracks had been there all along. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, staring out the window at the neighbors walking their dogs, and I just replayed everything in my head. The late nights, the work events, the unexplained tension between us. I wondered if I'd missed some obvious sign, if I'd been too focused on debugging code and chasing promotions to notice my marriage slipping through my fingers. When Emily came downstairs that morning, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing up. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and grabbed her coffee mug. That normalcy, that complete casualness, made me feel sick. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time to process, to breathe, to figure out what the hell was happening before I exploded and said something I couldn't take back. For the rest of the day I kept replaying her smile in my head, wondering how someone could stand there pretending everything was fine while secretly planning to leave me. That night, I lay awake next to her, listening to the soft sound of her breathing, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. Over the next week, I became hyper-aware of everything. Every little thing she did suddenly carried a different weight. The way she laughed when she texted, the way she lingered in the bathroom a little too long, the way she avoided making real plans with me. One night, I went through her Instagram for the first time in months, and noticed something subtle but gut-wrenching. All the recent pictures, work events, brunches, girls' nights. I wasn't in a single one. Not one. It was like she'd been quietly erasing me from her life without me even realizing it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead I kept pretending, hoping maybe she'd eventually come clean. By the end of June, I started having nightmares, vivid, restless dreams, where I'd walk into an empty house, furniture gone, walls bare, Emily nowhere to be found. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my chest tight, gasping like I'd run a marathon. I couldn't focus at work. My team noticed though no one said anything outright. I started skipping lunch, staring blankly at my monitor while emails piled up. Even my best friend Aaron called me out when I bailed on our usual Friday beers. But I couldn't tell him. I couldn't tell anyone. Part of me still clung to this ridiculous hope that there was an explanation, that maybe this was all just some misunderstanding. But deep down I knew Emily wasn't planning to save us. She was planning to leave. And the worst part, she'd already started. That Saturday morning, the day I found the papers, was the moment my world stopped making sense. But I had no idea just how much worse it was going to get. Because a week later, I saw something that broke me completely. Something that made the divorce papers look like nothing. And after that, there was no going back. I used to think there's a limit to heartbreak. Like there's only so much pain a person can handle before they just go numb. But I was wrong. That week proved me wrong in every possible way. After finding the divorce papers, I thought I'd hit rock bottom. But the thing about rock bottom is, sometimes you don't realize there's a trapdoor waiting underneath. It was July 2nd. I remember because my company had just sent out an email announcing the upcoming 4th of July holiday schedule. Everyone in the Slack channel was buzzing about barbecues and fireworks. And I was sitting there pretending to care while my mind kept looping back to Emily and the papers I still hadn't mentioned. That afternoon she texted me saying she had a work dinner downtown and wouldn't be home until late. It wasn't unusual. Her job was full of networking events. But something about the message felt rehearsed, short, distant, like she was checking a box rather than informing me. I sat at my desk staring at the message for a full minute, debating whether to respond with a casual okay or call her and push for details. In the end I did neither. I just left my phone on the desk, grabbed my jacket and drove home early. The house was quiet when I got there. I microwaved some leftovers, sat on the couch and turned on the TV without really watching it. The silence felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in. Then around 8:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Aaron. "Bro, are you okay?" That's all the text said. Simple, direct, but strange enough to make my stomach twist. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't reply immediately. I called him instead and when he picked up his voice was low, almost hesitant. "Mike, listen, I don't know how to say this man but I'm downtown right now, and I just saw Emily. She's at that rooftop bar on 5th and she's not alone." For a second I didn't understand. My brain refused to connect the dots. "She's with some guy," Aaron continued. "They were holding hands. Look, I didn't want to be the one to tell you but I hung up before he could finish. I don't even remember the drive. One second I was in my living room, and the next I was pulling up near the bar Aaron mentioned. The streets were crowded, Friday night traffic, people spilling out of restaurants, music blasting from nearby patios. It all felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. When I reached the rooftop, my palms were sweating, my chest tight. The elevator doors opened and there she was, Emily, sitting at a corner table, wine glass in hand, laughing at something the man across from her had just said. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a crisp white button-down. I didn't know him, but something about his relaxed confidence told me everything I needed to know. I froze, hidden behind a group of people near the bar watching her. My wife leaned forward, touch his hand and smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and crushed my heart in their fist. I couldn't breathe. Every sound around me, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation, the bass from the speakers, faded into a distant blur. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I wanted to storm over, to demand answers, to scream, to cry, to do something, but I didn't. I just stood there, numb, staring at the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and realizing I didn't know her at all. After what felt like an eternity, I turned and left. I didn't even wait for the elevator. I took the stairs, my legs trembling so badly I almost tripped twice. By the time I reached the street, I sat in my car for nearly 30 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. At some point I started laughing. This low, hollow, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own. I guess some part of me had been expecting this. Maybe I'd always known deep down, but actually seeing it, broke me in a way I didn't think was possible. When Emily got home around midnight, I was sitting on the couch in the dark, staring at nothing. She walked in, heels clicking softly against the hardwood, and froze when she saw me. She asked why I was awake. Her voice was calm, steady, too steady. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to speak without shattering. She went upstairs without pressing further, and that silence between us, it was louder than any fight we'd ever had. That night, I lay in bed next to her again, my back turned, my body stiff, and I realized something terrifying. I wasn't angry, I wasn't jealous, I was empty, and somehow that felt worse than rage ever could. Over the next few days, I started spiraling. I stopped eating properly. My sleep was wrecked. Every time Emily left the house, I wondered if she was meeting him again, whoever he was. I started noticing new patterns. Her work events had doubled. She'd get dressed up more than usual, put on makeup she hadn't touched in months, wear that perfume I didn't recognize. She'd hum while doing her hair like a teenager getting ready for a date. And me? I became a ghost in my own home. I'd walk past her in the hallway, and she'd smile faintly, like nothing was wrong, like I didn't already know, like I hadn't seen her with my own eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. One night, while she was in the shower, I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at her phone on the nightstand. I'd never snooped before. I always believed trust was sacred, but in that moment it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. I opened her messages, and that's when everything clicked into place. His name was Daniel Cole. I scrolled through weeks of texts, plans for dinners, inside jokes, little I miss yous, and last night was amazings that made my stomach twist. But the worst part wasn't the cheating. The worst part was reading her messages to him about me. Mike's too focused on work to even notice. I'm basically living with a roommate at this point. He doesn't make me feel alive anymore. I think he'll sign the papers without a fight. He's too passive for drama. I dropped the phone on the bed and just sat there, my vision blurred, my hands trembling, but there was this strange cold clarity in my mind. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated. She wasn't just falling out of love. She was strategically leaving me, while lining up her next chapter. She'd already planned the narrative, decided who I was in her story, the distant, oblivious husband who wouldn't put up a fight. And for a moment, I hated myself for proving her right. I didn't confront her that night, or the next, or the one after that. I didn't know how. Instead, I withdrew completely. I stopped trying to talk to her, stopped trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. I started sleeping in the guest room, telling her I was working late, when in reality, I just couldn't stand being near her. But the silence between us didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like hers, like she'd already checked out and was just waiting for me to catch up. By mid-July, I'd lost nearly 10 pounds without even noticing. I avoided Aaron's calls, ignored my mum's texts, stopped going to the gym. Work piled up, deadlines passed, and my manager pulled me aside for a friendly chat about my performance. I nodded, promised to do better, and went back to my desk without really hearing a word she said. My entire life was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was just standing there, watching it happen. And then, just when I thought I couldn't sink any lower, Emily made her move. On July 17th, she sat me down at the dining table. I knew what was coming before she even opened her mouth. She talked about growing apart, about different priorities, about how she'd tried to make it work but needed to be true to herself. I sat there nodding, silent, my hands clasped tightly in my lap so she wouldn't see them shaking. When she finally slid the divorce papers across the table, I didn't say a word. I just stood up, walked upstairs, and closed the door behind me. That night, I stared at the ceiling until sunrise, and for the first time since this all began, one thought kept echoing in my mind. I have nothing left to lose, and I didn't know it then, but that thought, that quiet, devastating realization, would change everything that came next. Because when someone takes everything from you, you eventually stop being afraid of anything. And Emily, she was about to learn that the hard way. I used to think grief was loud. I thought heartbreak came with screaming, slamming doors, shattered dishes, and endless fights that echo down hallways. But the truth is, it's quiet, suffocatingly quiet. The day Emily finally asked for the divorce, my entire world went silent. She didn't yell. I didn't yell. There were no tears, no last-minute confessions, no desperate begging for us to work things out, just emptiness. Like two strangers dividing up their lives while pretending they weren't tearing apart 8 years of memory. That night, I sat alone in the guest room, with the signed papers in front of me, staring at my own name in black ink. It felt unreal, like looking at someone else's life on paper, but it was mine. It was happening. And yet as I stared at those pages, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Not completely. I hated what she did. I hated the lies, the betrayal, the fact that she'd already chosen someone else before I even knew we were broken. But part of me, still remembered the Emily who used to wake me up with coffee on Sundays, who laughed so hard she cried when we burned our first Thanksgiving turkey, who danced barefoot in our kitchen while blasting Fleetwood Mac on full volume. And losing that version of her, or maybe realizing she was never really mine to begin with, was the kind of heartbreak I didn't know how to recover from. The first few weeks after she moved out were brutal. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts but by memory. Every room reminded me of something we built together. The couch where we binge-watched Breaking Bad, the patio where we grilled burgers on summer nights, the hallway where we argued about buying a dog we never ended up getting. I'd catch myself walking into our bedroom expecting her to be there, only to remember she wasn't. Her side of the closet was empty, but sometimes I'd still find a stray hair tie or a bobby pin tucked into the carpet, like little reminders of a life I'd lost. At night, I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head, every conversation, every moment I might have missed. I kept thinking, was there something I could have done differently? Could I have saved us if I'd tried hard? But no matter how many times I tore the past apart, I never found an answer that made it hurt any less. I stopped taking care of myself. I stopped cooking, stopped going to the gym, stopped returning calls from friends. My diet became a rotation of cheap takeout, instant noodles and warm beer. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling and think about getting up. But most days I didn't. Work wasn't any better. I'd log in, open Slack, and pretend to be functional, while barely contributing to anything. My manager pulled me aside in early August and said, "Mike, you've been missing deadlines. You okay, man?" I nodded, gave some half-assed excuse about just adjusting, and went back to my desk. But the truth, I wasn't okay. I was unraveling. The worst part was the loneliness. It wasn't just missing Emily. It was realizing how much of my identity had been tied to being her husband. We built this entire life together, and without her, I didn't even know who I was anymore. Friends tried to help, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. Every time Aaron called, I let it go to voicemail. My mom left 3 messages, saying she was worried, and I couldn't bring myself to respond because I didn't know how to explain what had happened without breaking down completely. I told myself I just needed time, that eventually the sharp edges of the pain would dull, that I'd wake up one morning, and it wouldn't feel like someone had hollowed me out from the inside. But every day bled into the next, and nothing changed. Then came the first time I saw Emily and Daniel together in public. It was September 4th, 2021. I went to the grocery store, something I'd been avoiding because it reminded me too much of all the little routines we used to share. And there they were, in the produce aisle, holding hands, like they didn't have a care in the world. I froze, gripping the handle of my shopping cart so tightly my knuckles went pale. She saw me too. For a split second, her expression faltered, guilt, maybe, or discomfort, but then she smiled faintly, like we were old acquaintances who'd just run into each other. And Daniel, he didn't even acknowledge me. That moment broke something inside me all over again, not just because she'd moved on so fast, but because it made me realize how disposable I must have been in her eyes. 8 years together, and she looked at me like a stranger. I left the store without buying anything. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, fighting the urge to scream, to hit something, to just feel something other than this endless, suffocating numbness. It was around this time I started therapy. Aaron practically forced me into it. He showed up at my place one night with a six-pack, sat me down and said, "Mike, this isn't you, man. You're fading. You need help." And maybe for the first time since this all began, I admitted he was right. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was patient. She didn't give me cliches or cheap advice. She just listened. At first, I hated talking about Emily. Saying her name out loud felt like tearing open a wound I'd been trying to stitch shut. But slowly, session by session, I started unpacking the anger, the shame, the grief. She told me something that stuck. This isn't just about losing Emily. It's about losing the life you thought you were living. And she was right. I wasn't just mourning a marriage. I was mourning the version of myself who believed in us. By October, I'd started to regain tiny pieces of control. I went back to the gym, started cooking real meals again, reconnected with Aaron and a few other friends I'd pushed away. It wasn't much, but it was something. Still, healing wasn't linear. Some days, I felt almost normal. Other days, I'd wake up with this crushing weight on my chest, and spiral right back into the pain. And then, just when I thought I was making progress, Emily reached out. It was November 19th. I got a text from her out of nowhere. "Hey, can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. I didn't respond immediately, but the message gnawed at me all day. Eventually, curiosity or maybe stupidity won out, and I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her new apartment. When I walked in, she looked different. Not in the way she dressed. That was still polished, effortless. But in her eyes, there was something brittle there. Something I couldn't quite place. She made small talk at first, like we were catching up after years apart. And then she dropped it. "Daniel and we're not together anymore." She didn't say why, and I didn't ask. But what shocked me wasn't that they'd split. It was what came next. "I miss you, Mike." She said it softly, almost like she didn't believe the words herself. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the woman who'd torn me apart, wondering how she had the audacity to sit across from me now, months later, acting like we could just rewind everything. I left without saying much, but that conversation planted something in the back of my mind. Not hope, not forgiveness, but a quiet, simmering question. Why now? What had happened between them? Why was she suddenly reaching out after months of silence? I didn't know the answer yet, but I would. And when I finally found out, it changed everything. By December, rumors started circulating among our mutual friends. I wasn't looking for information. I tried hard to keep my distance. But whispers have a way of finding you when you least want them. Turns out, Daniel wasn't who Emily thought he was. He wasn't some successful entrepreneur like she'd bragged about. He was a middle manager at a mid-tier finance firm, who'd been stringing her along with promises he couldn't deliver. Worse, apparently she'd found out he'd been seeing someone else the entire time he was with her. In a twisted way, I should have felt vindicated, karma, right? But instead, all I felt was this hollow sense of inevitability, like the universe had just confirmed what I'd known deep down all along. Emily didn't leave me for Daniel. She left me for the idea of Daniel, the fantasy, the escape. And when that fantasy crumbled, she had nowhere else to turn, except back to the man she'd assumed would still be waiting for her. But she was wrong. I wasn't the same man anymore. And that realization, that shift was the first real step toward getting my life back. What Emily didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that the balance of power between us had shifted completely. She thought she could waltz back into my life like nothing happened. But I wasn't the man who signed those divorce papers anymore.
I was someone else now, someone who'd survived being burned alive and come out on the other side. And if she thought she could manipulate me again, she was in for a brutal awakening, because karma hadn't finished with her yet, and this time I wasn't going to sit back and watch it happen.
I can't lie to you. Healing wasn't some magical process where I woke up one morning and everything made sense. No, it was messy. It was ugly. It was nights where I couldn't sleep and mornings where I didn't want to get out of bed. It was sitting in my car after work with my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the weight that still sat on my chest. But somewhere in that darkness, something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle, like the faintest hint of light at the end of a long tunnel. I remember the exact moment it happened. It was late March. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling aimlessly through Netflix, pretending I cared about some crime documentary I wasn't really watching. My phone buzzed, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't another credit card company reminding me of overdue payments or one of my buddies checking in. It was an email from a company I'd applied to ages ago, a mid-sized software firm in Dallas. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another rejection, but something made me open it, and there it was, in bold black letters. We'd like to invite you for a second-round interview. I just sat there staring at the screen, my heart pounding. After months of feeling like I was drowning in failure, here was a lifeline. That email was the first tiny spark of hope I'd felt in a long, long time. The next few weeks were brutal, prepping for interviews, fighting the constant voice in my head telling me I wasn't good enough. But I pushed through, and on April 19th, I got the call. They offered me the job, a solid role, a decent salary, stability. I wish I could tell you I celebrated with champagne and confetti. Truth is, I just sat on my bed and cried. Not tears of joy, not yet. They were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of finally feeling like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely worthless. And you know what? That job saved me in more ways than one. It gave me structure when I desperately needed it. It forced me to get out of bed, to shower, to show up, to contribute. My coworkers didn't know the storm I'd just crawled out of, but in their casual conversations and dumb inside jokes, I found tiny pockets of normalcy I didn't realize I'd been craving. But healing wasn't just about rebuilding my career, it was about rebuilding myself. I started going to therapy. I'd resisted it for months, telling myself I didn't need it, that I could handle it on my own. But sitting in that small, softly lit office, with a woman named Dr. Parker, I learned that healing wasn't about pretending to be strong. It was about facing the pain head-on, letting myself feel it instead of burying it. And I started running again. I know it sounds cliché. The broken guy laces up his sneakers and takes up jogging like it's some movie montage. But those morning runs became my sanctuary. Just me, the pavement, and my headphones blasting Springsteen, Bon Iver, or some random playlist I'd thrown together. Each mile felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself that I thought I'd lost forever. By the time summer rolled around, I was okay. Not amazing, not healed, but okay. And after everything I'd been through, okay felt like a miracle. Then came the message. It was late July 2021 when her name popped up on my phone. Jessica. I stared at the notification, my stomach twisting. I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized 5 months earlier. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like forever before I finally opened it. It was short, almost casual. Hey, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Can we talk? I laughed, out loud. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. For days, I ignored her. I told myself I wouldn't respond, that she was part of my past now. But then she started calling, leaving voicemails, sending longer texts. Her tone shifted from casual to desperate. I made a mistake. I didn't know what I had until it was gone. I miss you. And then one night she showed up at my apartment. I'll never forget that moment, opening the door and seeing her standing there, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing the same oversized hoodie she used to lounge in on lazy Sundays. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She looked smaller somehow. She told me everything. Turns out, the guy she left me for, the one she risked our entire marriage over, he cheated on her, drained her savings, left her in debt and completely alone. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. The other part, the louder part, wanted to scream in her face, to remind her of the nights I cried myself to sleep, of the humiliation, of the wreckage she left behind. But instead, I just listened. When she finished, she asked if we could try again, said she'd do anything to make it right. And here's the part I didn't expect. A year earlier, I probably would have said yes. I was so desperate for her love, so afraid of being alone, that I would have taken her back without thinking twice. But now I looked at her, and for the first time I saw her clearly, not the woman I thought she was, not the version of her I'd built up in my head, but the reality, and I realized something shocking. I didn't love her anymore. That realization hit me like a freight train. It wasn't anger. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, the kind that comes only after walking through fire and somehow surviving. I told her I couldn't do it, that I'd forgiven her but I couldn't trust her, that I'd rebuilt my life, and I wasn't willing to burn it all down again for someone who'd already proven they could walk away when things got hard. She cried, begged, told me I was making a mistake, but for the first time in years, I didn't waver. After she left that night, I sat in the silence of my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window, and for the first time since the day I found those divorce papers, I felt free. Not because I'd won, not because karma had somehow evened the score, but because I'd finally chosen. And that was the moment I realized, sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't getting back at someone, it's building a life so good that they can't be part of it anymore. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. Because Jessica wasn't done yet. She started reaching out to my family, telling them we were working things out. She showed up at my office one afternoon, causing a scene in the lobby until security had to escort her out. She emailed me long letters, some apologizing, others lashing out, blaming me for giving up on her. It was exhausting. Eventually I had to block her on everything. New number, new email. I cut off every thread that tied me to her, no matter how small. And slowly she faded from my life. By December 2021 I barely thought about her anymore. I was focused on my job, on my friends, on myself. I wasn't looking for love, but I wasn't running from it either. And somewhere deep down I knew that when the time was right, I'd be ready to open my heart again. But Jessica's spiral wasn't over. In early 2022, I heard through a mutual friend that she'd filed for bankruptcy. The guy she left me for had left her with tens of thousands in debt, and she was living with her sister, barely scraping by. It should have felt like closure, like karma finally delivering justice. And in some ways, it did. But mostly it just made me sad. Because despite everything, there was a time when I loved her more than anything. And seeing what she'd become, it was a reminder that choices have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are brutal. By the time I entered 2022, I wasn't the same man who found those divorce papers on the kitchen counter. I was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, I was finally ready to start living again. But I had no idea what was coming next, and how one unexpected encounter would change everything I thought I knew about love, forgiveness, and second chances. By the time 2022 rolled around, I thought I had finally closed that chapter of my life. I wasn't over everything. Scars like that don't just vanish. But the wound had healed enough for me to breathe without pain. I had a stable job, a healthier routine, and a better understanding of who I was outside of being someone's husband. But life has a funny way of testing you when you least expect it. It was a cold Saturday morning in late February when it happened. Dallas had just come out of one of those rare winter freezes that paralyzed the city for days, and I'd gone down to a local coffee shop to grab my usual, a flat white and a blueberry muffin. I was scrolling through the news on my phone when I heard someone call my name. I looked up and for a second I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was Jessica. She looked different. Not in the way you notice when someone changes their hair or loses weight. This was deep. Her posture was slouched. Her eyes carried a heaviness I didn't recognize, and there was no trace of the confident woman who once walked out of my life without hesitation. We stood there for a few seconds, just staring at each other, both unsure who would speak first. Finally she managed a quiet hello, her voice cracking like she'd been holding back tears. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk out. Another part, the softer part I thought I'd buried, told me to stay. We ended up sitting at a corner table, sipping our coffee in silence before she finally started talking. She told me everything. After her boyfriend cheated on her, she tried to pick up the pieces, but it was like everything she touched fell apart. She lost her job, moved in with her sister, And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, she realized she didn't just lose me, she lost the version of herself she used to be when she was with me. I didn't know what to say. A year earlier, I would have given anything to hear those words. I would have begged for this moment, prayed for it even. But sitting there listening to her now, I felt detached. Not angry, not bitter, just detached. Because here's the truth I hadn't admitted to myself until that moment. I'd already grieved the marriage. I'd mourned the man I was when we were together, and in doing so I'd moved on, even if I didn't realize it until that second. She asked me if we could try again. I looked at her, and my chest tightened, not from longing, but from the weight of finality. I told her no, not harshly, not with resentment, just, no. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't argue this time. She just nodded, whispered that she understood, and stood up to leave. Before she walked out though, she said something I'll never forget. I hope you find someone who loves you the way I should have. That moment broke something inside me, not because I still loved her, but because I finally let go of the anger I'd been carrying like armor for so long. I walked out of that coffee shop lighter than I'd felt in years. The next few months were a strange kind of peaceful. Work was going well, therapy was helping more than I realized. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away during my marriage, started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in reaction to my past. I was building something new. And then out of nowhere, life threw me a curveball I didn't see coming. Her name was Emily. I met her at a charity 5K my company sponsored that spring. She was standing at the registration table, laughing with one of the volunteers, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and her cheeks flushed from the heat. She had this easy energy about her, like she'd figured out how to be comfortable in her own skin, something I was still learning myself. We started talking casually, nothing serious at first, just shared playlists, weekend coffee runs, trading sarcastic jokes over Teams messages at work. But the more time I spent around her, the more I noticed something different about the way I felt. With Jessica, love had always felt heavy, like I was constantly working to prove myself, terrified she'd decide I wasn't enough. But with Emily, it was the opposite. It was simple, effortless. One evening in early June, after one too many drinks at a rooftop bar downtown, I caught myself laughing, really laughing, in a way I hadn't in years, and I realized something startling. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't fully healed. No, some scars would always, but I wasn't carrying my pain like a backpack full of bricks anymore. And for the first time, the idea of loving someone again didn't scare me. Emily wasn't a replacement for Jessica. She wasn't the happy ending to fix everything that went wrong, but she was a reminder that love could be kind, that it didn't have to hurt to be real. By the time fall came around, we were officially dating. My friends noticed the difference in me immediately. I smiled more, laughed more, breathed. Even my mom, who had quietly hated Jessica from the beginning, but never said a word, told me she hadn't seen me this happy in years. And yet, life still had one more twist to throw at me. In November 2022, Jessica reached out again. This time, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't manipulative. It was quiet. She sent me a simple message. I heard you're seeing someone. I'm glad you're happy. I hope she treats you the way I couldn't. That was it. No attempt to win me back. No emotional games. Just closure. I stared at that message for a long time, before replying with a simple thank you. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean excusing what someone did. It just means you've made peace with the fact that it happened, and you're choosing to move forward anyway. I didn't forgive her for her sake. I forgave her for mine. Now, sitting here in early 2023, looking back at the man I was when I found those divorce papers on the kitchen counter, it almost feels like I'm remembering someone else's life. That day broke me. It stripped me down to nothing, forced me to confront every insecurity, every fear, every quiet, gnawing doubt I'd buried deep inside myself. But it also rebuilt me, stronger, softer, and more honest than I'd ever been before. Jessica lost everything chasing something she thought would make her happy. And me? I gained myself back. It's ironic, isn't it? Back then, I thought my world was ending. But now, I see it clearly. That moment wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. Emily and I aren't talking about marriage yet. We're taking things slow, being intentional, enjoying the process instead of rushing to some finish line. And for the first time in my adult life, I feel content. Not because someone else is filling a void,
but because I finally learned how to be whole on my own. Sometimes, karma doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace. It looks like choosing yourself when the world tells you to break. And sometimes, the most powerful story isn't about the person who left you. It's about the person you become when they do. Final thought for the audience. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're where I was a few years ago. Maybe you're holding shattered pieces of a life you thought would last forever. Maybe you're drowning in anger, in heartbreak, in betrayal. If that's you, I promise you it doesn't stay this way forever. One day, you wake up and realize the pain doesn't define you anymore. One day, you breathe without it hurting. One day, you laugh, and it feels real again. And when that day comes, you'll understand what I learned the hard way. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to find everything you actually need.